He strode out of the marital apartments without even attempting to soften the loud slam of the door. In the Caserta Palace, such sounds spread instantly, like a special kind of language that needed no interpreters. Within a few minutes, the courtiers were already whispering to one another the phrase the King of Naples had allowed himself. He had declared that his young wife smells like a wild boar. For a delicate Austrian princess, it was hard to imagine an insult more degrading. She had not yet even been properly introduced to the Neapolitan court. Almost nothing was known there about her character, habits, or virtues, and yet her husband's first verdict on her was framed in the crudest possible terms and echoed through the entire residence. When the bride awoke, the events of the night were related to her with great caution, every word carefully chosen. But the blow could not be softened. Maria Carolina, who only the previous day had entered Naples as the lawful wife of a monarch and as an ally of great importance for European politics, suddenly felt like a humiliated girl abandoned on foreign soil. On hearing her husband's words, she burst into tears, not only out of hurt at him, but also out of helplessness before circumstances in which her own will meant so very little. In May of 1768, in the very first weeks of her marriage, Maria Carolina clearly realized that her life at the Neapolitan court was beginning not with honor and celebration, but with a crude, almost domestic rejection. In the family of the Austrian empress, the birth of a child was more a routine element of court life than an exceptional event. Maria Carolina, born in the middle of the 18th century, became the 13th child in a long line of heirs. No indulgence was shown to children. Games, songs, and dancing existed strictly by schedule, like everything else. The central focus was study: history, mathematics, foreign languages, handwriting, drawing, needlework, and lessons in comportment at table and in the audience chamber. It was expected of an archduchess that she would one day be able to speak with equal confidence about politics and about horse breeding. At the same time, the girl's inner world interested almost no one. Her first governess, Countess von Brandeis, kept her charges in iron discipline, but in relation to Maria Carolina, this strictness gradually slid into brutality. One punishment too many ended with the child breaking every rule of court etiquette, going to her mother on her own. She walked down several corridors, entered the empress's rooms without being announced, and silently rolled up her sleeves. There was barely any uninjured skin left on her arms. Only after that was von Brandeis removed from her position. Another tutor took her place, Countess Maria von Lerchenfeld. The relationship with her was quite different. The girl trusted her more than any other adult and once confided that she would like to marry for love, as the Empress herself had once done. Lerchenfeld replied without comforting allusions. Maria Carolina's marriage would be determined not by her feelings but by the interests of the dynasty. For the young princess, this seemed a flagrant injustice. If her mother had had the right to choose with her heart, why was that right denied to her? There was, in addition, a clear inequality within the family. The Empress did have a favorite among her children, her elder daughter Mimi. Mimi was allowed what was strictly forbidden to the others. She received the most lavish gifts, and she did not conceal her power over her younger siblings. All the girls felt this, and their envy, as so often happens, was fueled by the behavior of the favored child herself. Mimi was almost a decade older than Maria Carolina and did not hesitate to tell her to her face that she was plain and unattractive. Meanwhile, negotiations were underway for a dynastic marriage with the King of Sicily and Naples. At first, another daughter was being considered for this role, Maria Josepha, the 12th child of the Empress. A rich dowry was being prepared for her, and the ceremony was being carefully planned in every detail. In the autumn of 1767, the bride was presented with a miniature portrait of her fiancé in a diamond-studded frame. The image of Ferdinand itself
revealed very little about the man, but persistent rumors circulated at court. The young king was somewhat coarse, not particularly competent in affairs of state, and chiefly devoted to hunting. The wedding was set for mid-October. Maria Karolina prayed fervently for a happy marriage, but a few days before the ceremony she fell ill. The illness progressed with alarming speed, and by the time she should have been standing at the altar, the young woman was already dead. For imperial policy, this was not only a family tragedy, but also a broken alliance. The empress had no intention of letting such a favorable match slip away, and soon the Neapolitan king was offered the hand of the next daughter in order of seniority, Maria Karolina. Because of the period of mourning, the ceremony was postponed until the spring of the following year. Until the wedding, the bride and groom were allowed to correspond. Maria Karolina wrote gentle, carefully composed letters. She inquired after Ferdinand's health, asked about affairs in his kingdom, and mentioned the books she was reading. The replies she received were courteous, almost exemplary, full of sympathy, gratitude, and conventional politeness. She had no idea that the king himself played no part in this exchange. The letters were drafted by a tutor who constantiated his fiancée the kind of conversation that the court scribes so deftly constructed in his name.
The wedding took place at the beginning of April, on the 7th day of the month, and unfolded in the manner common in the House of Habsburg. The groom remained far away, and at the altar his place was taken by a proxy. Standing beside Maria Karolina was her brother, formally representing the King of Naples. Those present had no choice but to admire the tableau. The young archduchess in a light-colored gown richly embroidered with silver thread, a heavy diamond necklace around her neck, the last gift from her mother before the departure. The ceremony itself passed quickly, without surprises. The true emotions began only once the priest had spoken the final words. The empress, accustomed to holding herself firmly in the presence of others, allowed herself to weep when surrounded only by her family. Maria Karolina immediately responded to this outburst, as though what had restrained her in the church no longer applied. "We shall not see one another again, my daughter," Maria Theresa repeated, clasping her hands. "These are our last hours together." This time the empress was not exaggerating. For her daughter, the marriage meant not only a change of name and titles, but a definitive rupture with the world she knew. Ahead lay the journey to a new court and a foreign country that she was entering not as a guest, but as its queen. The road to the Italian dominions took a considerable time. The cortege stretched into many carriages, one of which attracted particular attention. In it traveled the young wife of the Neapolitan monarch. She was accompanied by roughly 250 people, ladies of the court, maids of honor, priests, servants, and officials tasked with ensuring a smooth passage from one court to another. For Maria Karolina herself, this crowd of people only underlined her solitude. None of them could replace her mother, her sisters, or the familiar rooms of the Viennese apartments. She first met Ferdinand in the south, under a different sky and among different buildings. Their first encounter very quickly put everything into perspective. Before her stood a man of whom people had spoken in terms far too vague. In person, he struck one not with charm, but with awkwardness. Thin, slightly crooked legs supporting a disproportionately heavy torso with a noticeable paunch. He laughed often, sharply, in a high-pitched voice, and frequently at moments when there was no joke at all. His own witticisms, punctuated by this laughter, only deepened the sense of embarrassment. The courtiers accustomed to such scenes murmured among themselves, "You shall see, she will run away from him in the night." Maria Karolina, Raised in a household where duty and outward dignity were ranked above personal feeling, held herself together by sheer will. She endured almost the entire wedding banquet, doing exactly what she had been trained to do, smiling, replying to remarks, betraying neither fear nor confusion. But the tension was building. By the time the festivities drew to a close, genuine fear had taken hold of her. She felt neither affection nor even warm curiosity toward the man with whom she was expected to spend her life. The maid of honor who had accompanied her from Vienna later wrote in her reports, "The marriage has, after all, been consummated." She had personally seen how, at a predetermined hour, the young spouses were left alone and the curtains of their bed were drawn, a gesture which, in the culture of the court, signified that the ceremony was complete and the union recognized as fully valid. Early the next morning, at about 6 o'clock, Ferdinand emerged from the apartments, satisfied, flushed, in excellent spirits. His first remark became known at court almost immediately. "She sweats and smells like a wild boar," he said with evident relish, unconcerned as to who might hear. For those around them, this phrase became fodder for whispering and laughter. For Maria Carolina, it was yet another blow. The previous night she had simply been unbearably hot. The Neapolitan climate, heavy fabrics, agitation, and a copious banquet had all combined into an ordeal for a body accustomed to Vienna's weather and to a strict routine. Yet no one tried to interpret her condition with common sense. At her new court, from the very first days, the young queen found herself not at her husband's side, but at the center of ridicule. And the mere fact that she struggled with an unfamiliar heat became grounds for mockery. Ferdinand's coarseness set the tone for the early years of their married life. His words spread through the palace, solidified into a cruel joke, and for a long time shaped the way people looked at the young queen. Intimacy at home barely took shape. For the first 3 years, the couple had no children, and in the palace corridors, people began to whisper about the most unwelcome outcome for a dynastic marriage. If no heirs appeared, the king might seek a divorce. Maria Carolina had no choice but to accept the obvious. Her husband was not merely devoid of romantic appeal. He often behaved boorishly and clumsily, even in situations that called for basic tact. Over time, she learned not to expect understanding or support from him at all. Their marriage, in essence, rested on duty and calculation. Beyond the privacy of their rooms, the spouses showed almost no signs of affection. At court, this surprised no one. Marriages in ruling houses rarely grew out of mutual feeling. Yet despite this outward frigidity, the union turned out to be productive. From the early 70s to the early 90s of the 18th century, Maria Carolina bore one child after another, in all, 18. 11 of them died in infancy or early childhood, and each death was a separate family trauma, which, however, almost never reached the outside world. The court was accustomed to treating the birth and loss of royal children as part of a general political ledger. The solid education she had received in Vienna proved in Naples far more valuable than beauty or a pliant disposition. At a certain point, the queen took a seat on the secret council, the body in which the most important questions of governing the kingdom were discussed. Gradually, the very woman whom her husband had once mocked so crudely became one of the central figures in Neapolitan politics. Ferdinand, unlike her, had been poorly prepared for statecraft. In his childhood, he had been taught irregularly, without system, indulging his passion for hunting and entertainment more than nurturing any capacity for governance. He readily handed over what he himself could not manage to hold. Resolute, persistent, and adept at using networks of connection and information, Maria Carolina filled that void.
In time, her influence became so evident that far beyond Naples, people spoke of her as an independent political actor. Napoleon Bonaparte, who kept a close eye on the courts of Europe, called her the dangerous woman of Europe, a description that contained neither admiration nor flattery, but did acknowledge the scope of her power.
The Neapolitan kingdom was not rich. When France rose in revolution, swept away its own monarchy, and sent Maria Carolina's sister to the guillotine, there was real fear in Naples of a similar outcome. In the worst case, I have resolved to throw my 7 children into the sea and follow them Maria Carolina wrote to Vienna. I do not wish to become prey for these people, nor to beg anyone for mercy. In the end, however, she had to flee not from the revolution, but from Napoleon. At first, it seemed that the threat could be contained. Admiral Nelson helped to restore Neapolitan rule. The king and queen returned to the capital, and they treated the English admiral almost as a member of the family. But the respite was short-lived. The French emperor was too insistent on placing one of his relatives on the Neapolitan throne, and the court once more had to abandon the city. Maria Carolina went to Vienna not as a young bride this time, but as an aging woman whose former power had shrunk to her connections and the memory of her influence. There, in the city of her birth, she pleaded for help to liberate her domains, argued, reasoned, and tried to persuade the monarchs of Europe that Naples could still be saved. She did not live to see the final fall of Napoleon. Maria Carolina died in 1814. At court, it was said that in her last days she had been sorting through her letters, personal, diplomatic, familial, and that a lady-in-waiting found her at her writing desk already unconscious, or, as others put it, already dead. Alongside politics and family crises, her life also contained a genuine personal attachment in the which people later spoke in cautious terms, yet without much surprise. Maria Carolina had long been living in a marriage devoid of warmth, and for the first time there was a man beside her with whom she could speak not only of dynastic alliances and affairs of state. The affair did not last long, but for her it became one of the few truly bright episodes in her life. Against the background of endless pregnancies, court intrigues, wars, and flights from danger, this brief romance was a short reprieve, a time when life ceased to be nothing but duty and politics, and for a while reminded her that it could still bring joy.
Maria Carolina lived a life in which she was allowed to choose neither her husband, nor her country, nor even the image of herself. And who is this woman to you? Do you see in Maria Carolina a ruthless, power-hungry intriguer, a victim of the dynastic system, or a woman who simply played as honestly as she could with the cards she had been dealt? Write in the comments whose side you took while listening to this story. If you found this episode engaging, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. In doing so, you will support new stories about people whose names in textbooks concealed fully lived, very human destinies.